PRF, perpetually ready to fight. Hey YouTube, what's up? It's Anna, and today I'm here with a video about Narnia. Anna, did you finish To All the Boys I Loved Before? No. Did you read a book? No. I've never read a book. I did read Much Ado About Nothing, but I'm not gonna... You want me to talk about Much Ado About Nothing? No. Come on. I'm going to link the post down below. I wrote it 2 years ago, but this is basically the same as a post that I wrote over the summer between my freshman and sophomore year, I think, about how people tend to characterize Peter in the Narnia fandom, and how I fundamentally disagreed with it. It came from feelings about Peter, but it was mostly that I felt that Edmund and Peter, in the 10 years that I'd been reading Narnia, had effectively switched places in fans' minds. I would also like to begin by saying that this isn't like an attack on people who still hold this view or who characterize Edmund and Peter in different ways. I would also like to preface this by saying that I fundamentally made decisions about how the characters were going to behave in any fic that I wrote or any time I read through the Chronicles of Narnia when I was 13, and at that time people did seem to cast Edmund into this tall, dark, and handsome kind of role, and Peter as his sober companion, even in spite of the Prince Caspian movie coming out in 2008, which made us all wonder what was real and what was not. I'd like to begin for the third time by saying that who's to say what's real and what's not? The Pevensey children appear in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, Prince Caspian, The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. Briefly, 3 of them appear in The Horse and His Boy, and briefly 3 of them appear in The Last Battle. And I think a lot of the characterization comes from Peter's characterization from the Prince Caspian movie, where he's very angry and feels very bitter, and also from the ending quotes from The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Also, if I quote page numbers, it's from the large, unabridged Narnia. I use specifically the Barnes & Noble's Classics edition, but their page numbers are the same, and I think all of the unabridged. In The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, Peter is described as a tall and deep-chested man with a great warrior, and he was called King Peter the Magnificent. And Edmund is described as a graver and quieter man than Peter, and great in counsel and judgment. He was called King Edmund the Just. Peter is being defined as a warrior. He is a king and kind of warrior king. And I think we tend to ascribe certain attributes to a warrior king like that, like passion or anger. And these are actually attributes that we do see movie Peter display, which is interesting. And Edmund is described as a direct opposite to Peter. He's defined as Peter's foil? Ooh, what a word. He's described as somebody who, he's described as someone in relation to Peter. He's also described as a politician and not necessarily a warrior. Also, if we're gonna make Peter into the kind of character that he was in the Prince Caspian movie, then I think it's totally allowable to make Edmund his opposite. And I think that as long as Edmund and Peter play opposite to each other, that they have countering strengths and weaknesses that allow them to make basically 2 halves of a perfect whole, then you're on the right track in your characterization. I just come from the olden times, because lots of people who still do Narnia, as it were, are young. They're 15 or 16, and I'm 22, and I was doing Narnia when I was 12 or 13, so it was a long time ago that my primary thesis is I find Peter and Edmund to be both distinctly characterized by their roles in war, and I find them to be characterized by it in distinctly different ways that are complementary to each other, and ways that blur the lines between the two archetypes, which are going to be the warrior king for Peter and the politician for Edmund. And we're gonna actually continue to keep those archetypes. Edmund is always going to be defined as a diplomat king, but he defines himself as a warrior. We're going to see that Peter is defined as a warrior king, but finds himself through diplomacy, which is basically the crux of the issue. This would leave Peter and Edmund with contrasting skill sets and strengths and weaknesses that make them into a pair. This isn't to say that like Lucy and Susan's role in running Narnia wouldn't be important. I just haven't given it that much thought because of maybe I don't like women or something. The way that Peter and Edmund are described against each other, and also the way that we spend a lot of time thinking about Edmund and Peter as opposed to what Lucy and Susan were doing as queens. I'm going to start with Prince Caspian, and we're going to start with Edmund as a diplomat who defines himself as a warrior. So we see at the end of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, Edmund is described as somebody who is good in counsel and judgment, and we see him providing good counsel and judgment at the end of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, in The Horse and His Boy for a hot second before he fights Rabidash. I'm gonna be honest, been a long time since I've read Prince Caspian. But what I do remember, and that I've already written down 2 years ago, that Edmund is the one who is most upset by Trumpkin calling them children and insinuating that they cannot be real warriors or be real kings. It's also interesting to note, and this is on page 363, Peter's the one who tells him to relax. Edmund takes this attack, and I think what Trumpkin says is he calls them little children, and Edmund gets very upset. He takes this as his attack on his legitimacy as a king, and he says, I suppose you don't believe we won the Battle of Baruna, and that attacks their legitimacy because that's the battle in which they won the country back from Narnia. But it is also a personal attack for Edmund, and he says, you can say what you like about me because I know this instance, especially the Battle of Baruna, is a very pivotal moment in Edmund's life because it's the moment where he breaks the witch's wand and symbolically breaks the spell, and also when he becomes a different sort of man than he was at the beginning of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which is very important. It's also in Prince Caspian when Edmund duels Trumpkin. He duels him because he's less of a warrior than Peter, but he still wins because he's very smart. That's another way that we show that Edmund is an impressive warrior, but not necessarily for the same reasons that Peter is. So Edmund takes this attack, not really an attack, but a snide little comment on his legitimacy as a king as a personal affront to himself, because he is greatly defined by this very first battle that they had. And he also is the one he's also the one who, when they're walking along, points out old battlefields and points out the Battle of Baruna first, because he's someone who is personally defined by his battles. Also the moment from Prince Caspian where Peter and Miraz are dueling and Miraz falls down. Edmund, who's very nervous that Peter's not going to make it out alive, says, genuinely my favorite moment of all time, "Need he be as gentlemanly as all that? I suppose he must. Comes of being a knight and a high king. I suppose it is what Aslan would like, but that brute will be up again in a minute, and then..." Personally, I love this moment because it implies that if Edmund were dueling Miraz, he would have just stabbed him in the back, which is... it really jibes with my, reading of Edmund as a character. It really jibes with, what I believed he was going to do to Rabidash, which is execute him in The Horse and His Boy, when he's like, when Rapidash is like, Edmund, let me down from here or just kill me. And Edmund says, certainly. You're kind of like, oh, this is like personal for Edmund because he's not gonna like duel Rapidash, he's just gonna kill him. In that moment, Edmund would have been concerned with his life and the continuation of old Narnia, and impossible to do if Miraz wins the duel. Knowing that Miraz doesn't fight fair, it gives Edmund dispensation to also fight dirty. He also points out in this moment that Peter would never act this way, because Peter's the kind of warrior who is a king and who is a knight and who always does what Aslan wants him to do, which is what's important. Edmund becomes this character who would have only been focused on the outcome of the battle or the bigger picture of the battle, not on what Aslan wants. Edmund is not just a warrior, but a strategist, and that sometimes falls in line with him being framed as a politician or a diplomat. But in that moment, Peter doesn't kill Miraz. He doesn't even get the chance, but he wouldn't. And that's because Peter has this code that apparently Edmund does not. In fact, a gentleman, and not a hothead, and not someone who's so focused on the big picture. He's focused on the even bigger picture. And Peter doesn't not get to be a warrior in Prince Caspian. He does immediately get to wallop off Caspian's head. But this is within the context of a battle where such actions are warranted and they're even noble. Just killing people and executing them and stabbing them in their literal back is not noble or just. Peter takes his responsibility as a warrior and a king very seriously, especially in Prince Caspian. He knows the ins and the outs and the rules of battle and war like no one else. And he takes the duel. He takes Caspian's place in the duel. If Caspian were to die, then Narnia would not have a king to take his place, because Peter knows that he's not here. Peter knows in the book that he's not here to take Caspian's place as king, but to help put Caspian in his place, which movie Peter also gets around to. Peter's the first person to think of asking Miraz to box for the country, and he thinks that there's a very good chance Miraz will not take him up on his challenge. But he does want to use this opportunity to let Lucy and Susan find Aslan and get him to help them, and to at least strengthen his army so he's not sending a half-armed militia into a fully regimented army. And Peter's main goal here is to stop unnecessary amounts of bloodshed. Also in Prince Caspian, Peter is very good about playing on the people around him, their strengths and their weaknesses and their insecurities, and he lets the Bulgy Bear go and be a marshal of the list, even though it might be embarrassing, and he sends Wimblewether, the giant, who is crying the whole time, with Edmund and somebody whose name I can't remember, with them to go send the challenge because he thought it would cheer him up. I mean, he's also the sweetheart, honestly. Any characterization of Peter. Also, I think I'm responsible for Peter being characterized more as a sweetheart in the present tense. The Narnia fandom is not that big. Peter's main objective, this is like not a good objective for like a king to have, but Peter's main objective is like to not upset people. And so anytime that they have this strength or weakness, the other one comes in with a complementary strength or weakness, so Edmund doesn't care about upsetting people. This is a constant character trait throughout the series. The examples that I have here, the only times that Peter gets upset with one of his siblings, or really anybody in the books, are when they're being mean to Lucy. He gets upset when Susan is mean to Lucy in Prince Caspian, and he gets upset when Edmund is being mean to Lucy in The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe. But Peter always wants to make the people around him happy and wants to avoid conflict even in the last battle, when people are like, what happened to Susan? Peter doesn't really want to dwell on it. He doesn't want to upset his siblings because they're dead and she's not, or anybody else, and he doesn't want to really talk about it because he doesn't want to like bring up conflict now that she's just not with them and is not going to be with them. But Peter does get angry, as I have pointed out already, but it's always anger that is justified. I think that sometimes we can kind of paint Peter as this like older brother figure who overstepped in his responsibilities toward his siblings, and I do think that the movie did kind of, the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe definitely kind of pointed us in that direction, but even still, Peter's anger towards Edmund and the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and his anger towards Susan and Prince Caspian are kind of justified, and he, like Lucy, and this is important that it's like Lucy, have anger that is grown from a place of justice. And when I say justice, I mean what Aslan would want. He gets upset when people are mean to his sister, or when people are being unjust, as opposed to Edmund, who throughout the series continues to be like miffed by people questioning his legitimacy or his personality, like whether he's a person that people want to be around. Just like all the time, he's like about to, like, he's just ready to fight. The moral of the story is Edmund wants to fight people and Peter does not. And you know, please stop writing Peter. This is like my last ditch effort. Most people aren't doing this anymore, and I'm gonna take complete credit for that. I'm gonna 100% take credit for it. This movement back to where Peter is not trying to fight people. It's really important to me. Please start writing Edmund as perpetually ready to fight. Yeah, that's pretty much all I've got to say. Thanks for watching this video, I guess. I will talk about anything you want to talk about that is Narnia related. If you don't want me to make a video on it because you realize this was bad, but you do want me to write an essay on it because you read the post and you were like, oh, much better, go send me an ask over there, or leave a comment down below, and I'll see you at a different point in my life.